Hi there, Prairie Plant Girl here. Can you see the windows behind me? We had freezing rain all day yesterday. They are iced over here in the greenhouse. What I wanted to talk about today is the flowers that I'll be starting, or the flower seeds that I'll be starting in March. If I give you this information now, if any of them spur your interest, then you'll be able to still have time to pick up some seeds and start them as well. I garden in Saskatchewan, Canada. We have a very short gardening season, so your times for starting things might be slightly different than mine. The best way to know when to start your seeds is to find out what your average last frost date is, and you can usually find that by putting your area code or your zip code or the largest city that's near you just into the search bar and along with the words average last frost. And you should usually come up with a pretty good date from that. Your average last frost can vary a little bit from year to year. Mine seems to have actually bumped up about a week from what I'm used to planning for. So that's what I'm going to plan with this year, is that week earlier. So that puts my average last frost now around May 14th. Normally I've planned for about May 21st for my average last frost. But my resources now are saying about the 14th, the 11th to the 14th of May is generally when my average last frost has been in the last like 10 years. So that's what I'm going to plan for. What I do once I've figured out when my average last frost date is I put a 0 beside that week in the calendar. So see that week of May, I think here it's the 14th to 20th on this one. That's where I've put it. And then I count backwards 1, 2, all the way through the calendar back to usually into February is usually about when I need to go back to, because that's usually starting around 14 weeks before my average last frost date, and there's not much I'm going to be starting any earlier than that ever. If you missed my video about what I will be starting in February, I'll leave a link for it below, and you can see what type of plants I'll be planting then. But this video is going to be about March, which is approximately 7 to 11 weeks before my average last frost date. So that's the weeks that we're looking at here. So once I figure out my average last frost date and I figured out the seeds that I want to be starting and the plants that I want to be growing for the following season, I just put them into these little cases. And this year I had a lot, so I've divided them into early March and late March. That way it's just easy for me to just grab this packet this is the early March, so in the first few weeks of March, and grab the seeds out, and I look at my calendar. I've written on the names of the plants that I'm going to be starting each week. I don't go exactly to the date, I just kind of go generally by the week. So the first week in March that I'm going to be planting things is actually the second week of March, and it's going to be 10 weeks before my average last frost date. So the first thing that I'm going to be probably getting in the soil, the first seeds I'll be putting in the soil for March this year is Mimulus. You might know this plant as monkey face or monkey flower, and it's a really fun plant. I've grown it in the past, but never from seed. I've always bought starts before, so I'm really interested to see how this goes growing it from seed. I was excited to find these seeds. This one is called Magic Mix, and it's from TT Seeds in Winnipeg. So Mimulus is a great plant if you have damp, wet places in your yard. This plant does not want to dry out, and you might think, wow, you're growing in Saskatchewan, Canada, that's kind of odd. But I'll keep this in pots and I will just keep it watered really well. It won't be something that I'm growing in the ground and having to kind of keep that space of ground very moist, because that will be more difficult in my yard. You might have a space that has poor drainage with heavy clay, or maybe you have a natural creek or spring that runs through your yard. Mimulus would be a great thing to plant by that. Mimulus is also a great plant if you have an area that receives differing amounts of light that you want to plant up. Like, if you have a place that you want to put a patch of Mimulus somewhere, and one area maybe gets shaded by a shrub or a building or something, and the other area is getting a lot of sun, Mimulus will perform just as well in sun or shade. So it's a great plant for that. I am actually hoping to get these going. I like to put pots up the stairs along my deck towards my back door, and the lower pots don't get as much sun as the upper pots. So I'm thinking that this will be one of the better plants. I grew it years and years ago in that area, and as I recall, it grew really well there. So that's something that I'm going to be using it for. And I will use pots that don't have as free draining, that aren't as free draining, and that will make it easier for me to keep this nice and moist in that area. I also have drip lines run to those areas there, so I can give them a good amount of water, and that's a spot where I often have trouble getting that drip to perform the way as light enough for the plants that are there and the pots that I tend to use there. So I think having something that can take more moisture will be a great thing in that spot. Something else that I'll be planting in that second week of March, or 10 weeks before my average last frost, is Lobelia. Lobelia needs a lot of time to get going, but I find a fairly easy plant to grow from seed, and it's one of those plants that I like to have a lot of for in hanging baskets and planters. So it's nice to be able to start it from seed myself, and then I'm not spending as much at the garden center picking up flats and flats of Lobelia. So I have White Lady and Crystal Palace. They need a lot of time to grow, and I'll be starting them 10 weeks before my average last frost, but they won't be going outside until about 1 week after my average last frost. So they need a lot of time to grow. So if you can commit the space and the time, it's a great thing to start yourself. If you don't have that kind of space and time commitment for something like this, then you might want to just pick them up in flats if you like to grow a lot of Lobelia. You want to grow more than one seed in a plug cell as well. Lobelia is one of those plants, you don't want to just keep it to one seed. You want to have several in each to give a nice full plug to put into a planting pot or tray. That's my experience with it anyways. So just when you're looking for seed, don't think I want 25 plants, so if I get like 50 seeds, that's lots and lots. You know, you probably want more like 100 seeds for 25 plants at least. So something I've never grown from seed before as an ornamental plant, I guess, is thyme. This is magic carpet thyme, but I have some which I believe is magic carpet growing in my front yard over the rocks of the walkway. I absolutely love it. Everyone who sees it, especially in bloom, is really blown away by it. It's a very, very low growing thyme with little pink flowers, but they're not spikes of flowers, so they're still really low growing. They attract all sorts of pollinators, bees, butterflies, you name it, they're all in there. And it just looks gorgeous. It actually smells a little pretty too, especially when you walk on it and you get the actual thyme smell. But even the flowers, I'm sure that's what I smell in my front yard when they're in bloom. And I'd like to add to that, when I first put that in, I actually found a flat of it at like a Home Depot or something years ago. And that's how I got that thyme started. And you can divide it and move it around, but I find dividing it, at least in that area there where the drainage is really, really good in my front yard, then I have trouble remembering to go out there because it's full sun. I have trouble remembering to go out there and keep it damp while the transplants are getting established. So I'm hoping that if I can get some good early plugs of thyme going, I can get it in the spring when it's a little bit cooler, when the rest of the thyme that's growing there isn't as nice, and I don't think it would do as well transplanting because it's just waking up from winter. I think maybe putting plugs in there would be better. I could be wrong, and it could be a failure, and I think there's some other places in my yard that I'd like to grow some of this too. So I'm hoping to get a good flat of this going, and just pop it into pockets between paving stones and in pathways and things. So magic carpet thyme. Another plant that I have really enjoyed growing the last few years is Salpiglossis. Paisley flower, that's the more common name that you might know this by. This is a really pretty flower. I've been growing it in my yard for a few years from seed. And this is from a different grower, Prairie Garden Seeds. So it's out of Humboldt, Saskatchewan. So they just put their seed packs together by hand. I've written extra information on them because they come with basically the name of the company and the mailing address on them, and the name of the plant, I think, was on here. Yeah, they hand wrote the name of the plant on in pencil. So it's a pretty low-key place, but I got some neat plant seeds from it a few years ago, and this is one I'm still using. These need to be grown 8 to 10 weeks before you transplant them outside, and they can be transplanted about 2 weeks after your average last frost. So these will be going in closer to like my 8-week before my average last frost point. They are an 8 to 12 inch tall flower. I like to use them in flower arrangements, but mostly I just like to have them in my planters, in my pots. They're great in just flower beds, and they do attract aphids sometimes a little bit. And that's okay because it's keeping the aphids off of some of the other plants, and they don't really seem to mind the aphids. So, you know, it kind of keeps the aphids off of the things that really don't want them and won't do well with aphid attacks. And then I know to just pull up those plants or squish the aphids off those plants, and they've left the other plants alone. Little Bluestem. I've tried to have my eye out for some nice little Bluestem plants that I could tuck in. My front yard is mostly native plants in the planting beds, and I like to have a few native plants throughout my whole yard as well. And anytime I see little Bluestem for sale, it's in very large cans that they want quite a bit of money for, and they never look good. I mean, grasses often don't look good in their grower pots, but I thought, you know, for a few bucks, I am going to try and grow my own little Bluestem and just see how that goes for me in my yard. Did I say what little? It's a grass. Little Bluestem is a native grass to my region. It grows about 90 to 120 centimeters, which is, what is that? Like 3 to 4 feet tall, and that's the flower blooms, which grasses have. You might not think of them as flowers, and it adds nice movement to the landscape. But little Bluestem is supposed to be more of a clump forming grass that doesn't spread out all over and become a problem in the garden. So that's my plan for it. Last year I grew some summerberries yarrow, and I really, really liked it. Doesn't look like I have any summerberries yarrow in here as a dried flower right now, but it makes a beautiful dried flower, and it makes a great plant just in a regular arrangement as well, and it really attracts the pollinators. Summerberries has a nice range of kind of pinky red, peachy kind of shades to it, and I really like this yarrow. So I have a few seeds left in this pack that I had purchased last year, and I'm going to plant the rest out this year. I'm going to be growing Feverfew for the first time this year. Feverfew is used, I believe, as a medicinal plant, but I'm going to be growing it for cut flowers. It's supposed to be a great filler plant. It's part of the daisy family, and the one I have here is Amazon. So it's, I believe, white. I think they're all white petals with a yellow center. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I ordered this a while ago. It's supposed to be grown indoors 8 to 10 weeks before my average last frost. So March is definitely the time for me to be starting these. And I'm excited to see how they work out. Now, here's a seed that I picked up last year just impulsively on the seed racks in the stores. And it's a chrysanthemum, what's it called? Bright Eye. And I wasn't sure, and I really debated whether I wanted to grow it again. When it looks good in the garden, it looks amazing in the garden. And when it looks tired, when the bugs get to it, when it gets, you know, maybe not enough water or too much heat or whatever it is, I'm not sure. It was my first year growing it. It just looks really bedraggled. But it did make a nice look in bouquets, which is part of why I had grown it. And I decided I'm going to try it again. It seemed to have a real variation in the color. I don't know how well you can see. It's white petals, and it looks like almost like purples and yellows around the center. And some of them were more red, more yellow. Some of them had that really pretty purple that almost bled into the petals. They're quite varied in their look, and that can be nice to have because you get more selection that way out of one variety. I think they're around like 12 to 18 inches, so like 30 to 45 centimeters tall, and multiple flowers on a plant. So that's my early sowing plants that I need to get out. Kind of that first half of March, I'll get those started. The next half of March, I'll be going in with my Nicotiana. You'll hear a lot of people call it Nicotiana. This one is called Improved Heaven Sent, but this is actually just seed that I've saved over the years off my own plants. So I have a couple of vials here. And this is another one of those plants that's kind of hit and miss for me. I really, really love the full, beautiful flowers, but it does also tend to be a real aphid attractor. And this one can sometimes succumb to the aphids and look really raggedy. But I find when that happens, I just snip it off real low, toss those plants out to get those aphids out of my yard. It's easier. They're a very sticky plant, so I think even when the aphids start to get on them, I think the aphids just stick and can't even get off. It's a real sticky plant. So it's a great way to just get the aphids out of my yard. I had a plant just volunteer out in the yard, in my front yard actually, when I was moving some soil around, putting in some new shrubs, and I just let it go, and it was one of the nicest looking Nicotiana plants that I had in my whole yard. I really enjoyed having it there, and it reminded me that I do love this plant, and I just need to be more forgiving and appreciate that it takes those aphids for me and attracts them. Impatiens is another one that I've grown for years, and I used to grow all sorts of varieties of Impatiens. You may even have seen some of my videos of starting Impatiens and having several varieties, but I've just kind of gone through the last few years and just collected seed. They're really easy to collect seed off of, and I've just started just planting my own seed from year to year, and they grow really well that way. Impatiens, they take a long time to grow, and you have to be really careful about when you put them out because they really don't like the cold weather in the spring, especially with the young plants, but they're quite easy to grow. So if you have the space and the time to grow them, and you need something that grows well in shade, Impatiens are good for that. You can also get sun patiens. I don't have as much experience with growing them, but it's my understanding they grow just as well as the regular original Impatiens. They just will do better in sun. So, you know, give them a try if you haven't before. They give you a lot of color for just a few plants. Here's Soapwort. Soapwort is actually a perennial, and I planted a few plants last year, and they should come back for me again this year. But I thought it would be nice to have just a few more in my yard. So I think I'm going to plant a few more plants of this. I could wait for the ones that I planted last year to get a bit bigger and divide them. But I think I'm just going to go. It's a ground cover kind of plant, really pink, kind of really pretty little pinky purpley kind of flowers, kind of dainty looking. If I remember, I even threw a few bouquets, and they did all right that way. But I just think they're a nice thing to just kind of fill in and soften the edges of flower beds. This is a new one. I've been trying to get my hands on seed that I was willing to pay the price for. I don't know, I find the seed when you find it is a little bit pricey, but this is a pretty good sized package of it. This is a pincushion flower, or Scabiosa. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. I think that's how you say it. This is an annual flower. Again, it's supposed to be a great cut flower. Like I said, I haven't grown it before, so I don't have any real experience with it, but I'm excited to see how it does in my garden and how I can incorporate it into different bouquets and plantings. So this one is called Summer Fruits. Another plant that I love to have in my yard, and actually didn't get any going from seed myself last year because I tried to collect my own seed and it just hadn't worked out. So apparently I didn't have good seed left out of my own collected seed, but that is Osteospermum. I've normally grown Asti White as the Osteospermum that I grow in my own yard from seed, but this year I decided to try, this one is an Asti Mix, and I also grabbed this Sunset Shades. So the Asti Mix says it's large flowers in shades of lavender, white, and purple. The Sunset Shades is shades of yellow, orange, deep red, and salmon. And I had some that I'd picked up at the garden center last year that I think were part of this this kind of Sunset Shades look. Now, whether it was actually that branding of it, you know, different growers put different names to their plants, and they can look quite similar. But that's why I picked this one, because I really liked that kind of almost sunset look to those Osteospermums that I grew last year. This is just a plant that I love. I think it's a great workhorse. It just does a great job in the hot sun of the prairies. It can handle just a little bit of mistreatment, you know. I mean, you can't just let it go completely dry and forget about it, but it doesn't need the water like some plants do. It can handle the heat, and it fills in really nicely around other plants and plays well with them. So I really like to have my Osteospermums in my planters, and I find that it can handle a little bit of part sun as well, and like I said, a little bit more cold tolerant. So good to have when you have a short season and you can have frosts late and early in the year. Ornamental Millet. I grew this a couple of years ago. Last year I had experimented with trying to plant some seeds that I collected the fall before, and I didn't have high hopes for them, and I really should have just bought a package just to be on the safe side, but I wound up without any. I'm pretty sure this is a sterile plant. I didn't have any seedlings come up in my yard in the areas where the seed heads had fallen the year before, but it's a really nice millet plant with these deep purple spikes. I actually have, this is some of it. Now obviously it's not purple anymore, but on an old wreath that I've taken down, these are that I collected actually out, I believe, in the snow last late winter, early spring, after they'd sat out and gotten quite smashed with snow, and I put them on a wreath, and they still looked and performed quite well that way. And I loved the pop of color that they gave and the movement that they had in the yard, being kind of a spiky plant. I know I love spiky plants. And then how well they worked into, I had them in evergreen wreaths for the winter. I had them in that wreath that I put up kind of late winter, early spring. They just made a great all-around plant. They were great in cut flower arrangements. So I missed having them last year, even though I'd only had them one season before that. I definitely want to have them again. So I've got the seed and I will be starting them. So Ornamental Millet, this is Jade Princess. I picked up some Statice. I was just looking for any Statice, really, that I, again, wanted to pay the money for. Statice, I'm sure, used to be in my area kind of considered a somewhat weedy plant that was, you know, not looked that well upon by gardeners. But I'll tell you, it has grown hugely in popularity in the last few years, and I've had trouble getting my hands on a decent amount of seed for a price I want to pay. But I found this Apricot Beauty Statice seed at Stems, and I decided to give it a try for this year. I really want some Statice because it is great for cut flowers. It's one of those plants that you can cut and put in an arrangement and it'll just dry beautifully, keep its color quite well. And you know, it goes from just a fresh flower arrangement right into a dried flower arrangement with basically no effort from you. You don't need to hang it or bundle it or do anything special to it. And I really want to have it. I remember being quite young, and I worked at a miniature golf course, and we needed to be able to find plants that could hold up to the tough conditions in Saskatchewan with, you know, not being super well cared for there. And I grabbed some and put them in some planters the one summer. And when I first put them in, my boss wasn't really super sure that I had made a good plant selection. But I'll tell you, as those plants performed throughout the summer, I changed her mind because they did really, really well and held up and didn't need a lot of fuss and care like some of the other plants that we tried to have in there over the years. And you know, when you have the general public moving through and touching and handling and, you know, shooting golf balls through your flower plantings, it's good to have a good tough plant, and this one stood up well to those. So that wasn't the Apricot Beauty, I'm sure, back then, but it was Statice nonetheless, and it did really well. So I'm looking forward to having Statice in my yard. Last year I grew Nigella for the first time. I grew Moody Blues. Beautiful plant, great filler in flower arrangements. It looks really cool just growing in the garden, and it gets these big, beautiful seed heads. These aren't the greatest example here. The better ones are sitting on my kitchen windowsill, actually. But they get these really neat, I don't know how well you can see the detail there, the little spiky bits that come out the tops. But really neat little seed heads. obviously dry well that way as a seed head. And I just thought they were really a cool looking plant. So I have more than Moody Blues, and I purchased some Delft Blue. So these should both be in those blue ranges. I think the Delft Blue was more almost edging to purple, but I can't remember for sure, so don't take my word on that. It's recommended that you actually re-sow them every couple of weeks. But if you want them early on in the season, you'll need to start them early because they take quite a while to get going. And then if you resow them every couple of weeks, they say you'll have them all summer long. Now I found with cutting on the couple of plants that I planted last year that they actually did continue to bloom. If you're looking to do cut flower arrangements and sell them or provide lots, I think you would need to do multiple sowings. But just to have a few to tuck in here and there in the odd bouquet, I think just having, you know, half a dozen plants is probably enough that you can keep cutting on them and have them keep throwing up blooms for you throughout the season. And the last one that I plan to grow is Winged Everlasting. I grew this again for the first time last year. It wasn't that beautiful in my yard as a plant, but I think that was my fault. For the location it was in, I don't think it was getting enough sun, so it got a little bit leggy, kind of falling over. And I had some squash plants that kind of ranged through its space and pushed them down even more. But even given that, I was still able to cut long stems, pop them into flower arrangements. They're these little tiny white flowers, bright yellow centers. They have like a bit of a flat long leaf that grows all the way down the stems. And I was trying to scrape that off, or else I find it gets the water a bit clouded up and not good for the other plants in there. So that is a little bit of work to just kind of run your fingernail or something down the edge of the stem to get that leaf off, but I think it's worth it for the nice pop and a little bit of movement that these flowers provide. Now they're in with a bouquet here that I just grabbed out and just let dry, but that's the little flowers that are dried there. So you can see how nicely they dry. And they'll dry right on the plant sometimes too. I found I had a few, and they still look really nice then, even, you know, if they've gotten a bit old, pollinated or whatnot, they still work to put into arrangements and have some nice flowers. But then again, it's another one that you can dry and keep and have for dried flower arrangements. Check out these seeds and see if there's any that you would like to grow yourself. And then when I start getting my seeds started, I'll be bringing you along for that, so we can start them together if you like. Like I said, keep in mind that my growing zone might require slightly different starting times than yours, so just check when your average last frost is, read the packages, read the plant descriptions, and just see if you want to be starting yours as early as I am, or maybe your season starts a lot sooner and you need to be getting them started even sooner than I am. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.